This is episode 585 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. I am very pleased to be joined this week by Larry Behrens, our friend and has been an occasional guest on the show. He is director of communications with the pro energy group Power the Future. Welcome back to Tipping Point, New Mexico, Larry.
Hey, Paul, it's so great to be here, and thank you for having me.
Oh, always. And we'll talk a little bit about energy issues, or a lot about energy issues later on in the show. But first, talk about picture and what you guys do on energy, and then we'll talk a little bit about our work together as we're at the 4-year anniversary of the COVID lockdowns, and that was something that we got together on a few years, when that all broke. But what is Power of the Future?
Yeah, we're a 501(c)(4). We're a nonprofit, simply put, that advocates for American energy workers and against the green agenda. We've had the New Mexico presence for about 5 years now, and so I can, tell you that there's more than a few folks in Santa Fe that don't like us, but that's fine as long as the people providing energy do like us, and so that's what we do.
Yeah, exactly. Well, certainly energy issues in the state of New Mexico. That is, in many ways, your personal bread and butter. But before we get down to energy, state and national, let's get back into the not so way back machine when it comes to emergencies and COVID and the power of the executive in the state of New Mexico. In March of 2020, of course, that was March 11th is when the first emergency was declared by Governor Lujan Grisham. And you and I and our organizations were really the very first people, I think, kind of in the punditocracy, the people who talk to the media. I'm sure there was a lot of businesses at the time who were just kind of scratching their heads and wondering, why is this being done this way? But we really not only made the case, but made a public argument and tried to organize folks to express concern and outrage about the way things were going. So talk about your logic on that.
Yeah, and it's something I'm glad to talk with you about it. And first of all, I can't say it enough. Thank you for joining us in that because it was a gutsy thing. I know you took some flack. I took some flack for it. All those, I'll just be frank, all those idiots are quiet now because we've seen the results of what happened. And you and I were able to pinpoint that really early. And so just, so folks have a timeline, it was almost exactly 4 years ago when the governor started shutting things down and started doing the 2 weeks to slow the spread discussion. And I didn't disagree with that. It was a new thing. We didn't quite know what was going on. And you know what? 2 weeks to stop it seemed like a reasonable request. I seem to remember it seemed like in the middle of the week, and my kids went to school like a day or two after that. It was right before spring break, I think. And then, obviously we expected not to be in school spring break, so no big deal. But I didn't anticipate the power hungriness that would happen in Santa Fe. And the I can't find nice diplomatic words to use for it. The maniacal ruling of our lives to do it. And it has to be said on how a lot of the citizens accepted it as well. I think we put out our press release in April, and as we look to other states that were kind of reopening and kind of like showing a little hesitation to the strong narrative. And I think our press release just called to fairly reopen the state, to if we're going to allow everyone in a Walmart, then we need to allow everyone in a small business grocer as well. If we're going to allow everyone, it seemed like in the early lockdown situation, it really favored big box stores and those who could shop on the internet and so forth, which, internet access in New Mexico has been a longstanding issue. And so Sorry, I'm going to talk a bit because if that's
That's
okay,
okay.
because it was, and I know that you got a whole. I mean, we were accused of wanting grandmothers to die at that point, children to die. They had tape around, police tape around the playground near my house in Rio Rancho. It
Hmm.
was just pure insanity that we know now was completely unnecessary. In fact, it was the quote unquote cure was worse than the disease. And I can tell you things really started turning when, it went from the governor saying, okay, we may have to wear masks. You have to wear masks, but you can use a bandana, but then it has to be this mask, and then it has to be 6 feet apart. And we knew it seemed then she was making it up as it went along. And we know now that that was exactly the case. But one of the big turning points for me, besides our press release, was it was in summer 2020, and we took a trip out of state and we drove to see family in Illinois and through Missouri, and we were overnighting in Missouri, and there was a softball game going on, teenagers, and it was June, so it wasn't school, but some sort of teenage league, and people were in the stands, and this was June 2020, and my wife and I looked at each other as like, oh my gosh, the rest of the world is moving on with their lives, and they're not withholding, opportunities from their children. They're definitely not withholding education from their children. And meanwhile, my kids were, I had a kid that was out of the classroom for an entire calendar year. And no joke, the first day he went back, then they found that one of the hundreds of students he associates with in his class had tested positive. And so he was back out 2 weeks. The whole group was back out for another 2 weeks after being out for a whole calendar year. And so New Mexicans now see the hypocrisy of it. They see the failure of it. But I think the governor has taken a position of, oh shucks, I was just doing what I should to protect everyone. And it is pathetic to see them try to take that stance now, knowing the terrible results for New Mexico, both in preventing COVID deaths and in educational results and in mental health pitfalls that happened. And B, knowing that they just want to chalk it up to, oh, we didn't know better. Well, they did know better. And so I know that sounds like a long, angry rant, but that is really the nicest way that I could put it. It's because I think we've seen now that she really enjoys public health orders. She really enjoys using that as a tool to get what she wants and forcing it upon New Mexicans without any desire or understanding of how it impacts us. And so far, the legislature, the Democrat-led legislature, hasn't shown any will at all to check the powers of the governor. I'm sure maybe in her last year of her term in the last legislative session, there'll probably be more political will if they're worried that there could be a Republican governor, but it's pretty sad that politics falls victim to the reality of what it needs, and it's clear now that the governor's power needs to be checked.
Yeah, well, that's a great rant. I couldn't have said it much better
Sorry.
myself. And I would only add that I was really proud of that name, Fairly Open, because it not only implied fairly opening the businesses, and you cited the difference between a big box store and the mom and pop stores and the garden centers and whatnot versus Lowe's and Home Depot. They were, some were essential, some were non-essential. It was just a very, very poor way to do things, and we called for one set of standards in terms of safe operation. Now it turns out that probably none of those standards would have mattered, but at least if we'd done it that way, it would have been a fair scenario. But also, we wanted open data, open information. How were these decisions being made? And I think that really hits to the separation of powers issue and the Democrat legislature's unwillingness to hold the Democrat governor, kind of accountable for the abject failure of her policies. I'll first play on the field of COVID, and I'm on the site that I was on so much during the 2-3 years of COVID, which is World O Meter's coronavirus reporting website. New Mexico, with all of those lockdowns and everything that we did, all the businesses destroyed, the kids kept out of school, third highest death rate from COVID in the entire country. So didn't exactly work out very well. And, we were, again, I know we could injure ourselves, injure our backs, patting ourselves on the back. But in this particular case, it probably, I know you said something like this in the past. It is one of the things that in your lifetime and your work you're proudest of, and I totally concur that being willing to and kind of having the wherewithal to adjust to facts on the grounds, maybe not our expertise, but reading reports, documents, and looking at it through the window of basic human fairness. We were right, she was wrong, and we would have saved a lot of lives, a lot of kids' educations, a lot of businesses if we had been followed at that time. So yeah, I will pat myself. I'll pat you on the back too next time I see you in person.
Well, I think too, I mean, just some of the lowlights that I remember. I mean, I remember, and I forget the facility, the state shelled out millions for the facility because we were going to have everyone there because the hospital's going to be overwhelmed. It turns out they never got a single patient, right? We had people displaced because it turned out folks were going to need to go into those beds. It never had to happen, right? We had even into December of 2020, standing outside in the cold for food, and the governor's office called that a Republican talking point, just completely failing to acknowledge the reality. And let's not forget, one of the things that we uncovered was that we sent a public records request and found that while the governor was asking us all to sacrifice, and she would talk about a social contract and what we would do for each other, she was sending her staff to the store to buy booze and gourmet beef to do it. And so, yeah, if every New Mexican had a staffer that could run to the store and taxpayer dollars paying for the food, then maybe it would have been easier. But we saw the kid who made national news in Roswell who didn't have internet connection at home, so he literally sat outside the school's library so that he can get internet to go to school. And the governor didn't care, didn't visit. She had a business task force that I can't tell if they ever met that was supposed to guide her in reopening. And we all worried about whether it was turquoise or red or yellow was our county and what they could do. And they kept adding colors and taking away. And it seemed like a completely immovable goal to, excuse me, a complete movable goal that she kept putting on these counties. And after a while, people were able to see it was totally political.
All right. Well, as fun
All right, I
as it
got it
would
off my
be
chest. Sorry.
to continue this train of thought, and it's probably possibly the most important single issue that I've worked on in my public career in terms of public policy. This is something that while the governor and others would like to, I think, forget about it or just keep their power and move on and not have anybody question the outcomes and what actually went on. You are an energy guy, and there's a little bit going on in the world of energy these days. But let's keep the conversation here in New Mexico for starters. We had our legislative session, 30 days. The main thing that happened during that time period was the clean fuel standard. Some are saying that'll increase the price of a gallon of gas by 50 cents a gallon once it's introduced, once it's in the law. I have my questions about that. The other thing recently developed is that the royalty price increase was not adopted by the legislature, and the land commissioner, a Democrat, has decided that she's going to not sell out or lease out parcels of land uh, because she thinks she's not getting the rate that she wants for those, which is a very interesting logical leap that she's making. But talk about what's going on here in New Mexico on some of these issues, Larry.
Yeah, and so those are two really good points. I am a firm believer that the governor's clean fuel standard will raise gas prices because I know she will say, I watched the press conference when she signed it, and she will say, oh, there's no longitudinal data. All you have to do is point to the three states where this happens, and that is Oregon, Washington, and California. They are paying nearly $1 more per gallon than the national average, and it's well over $1 more than what is being paid in New Mexico for their gasoline. And I'll be the first to admit a lot of that, California is a tax crazy state, and so the taxes on fuel is absolutely a part of that. But it is part of the agenda thinking that says we can take something, completely replace it with something new, and the cost will be zero. That is just faulty thinking. Let's just assume and take it to another point. They shut down a coal-fired plant, so they're going to add enough windmills to do that. And they said, well, these windmills will make just as much power, so it should cost the same. Well, no, you need more transmission lines, you need to purchase the windmills. And so changing, even just changing, if it's a one-to-one, exchange with energy, which it's not, is going to cost money. And that is the same point here. And it was interesting to me, just as a side note, the governor said during the press conference that this fuel is already made for those states and it flies over New Mexico. I didn't know California was getting air fuel deliveries, but nonetheless, that's
Mhm.
probably what they have to do because the pipelines are being shut down. But this is an expense added on the fuel. To your point, how much it'll be, I don't think anybody can quantify, but that speaks to the question of why sign this bill if you can't quantify what it's going to impact for New Mexicans. They've tried to bring this bill 4 years and finally got it through this year. And in reading it, it's because they have consumer protections. And what the consumer protections look like, if you read the bill, it essentially says the Environmental Improvement Board will protect consumers if it gets too bad. That's it. There's no threshold. There's no like, if the price goes up 10 cents more because of this, then we will drop the state tax on gasoline until it goes to an affordable. There's no, so it just puts in their consumer protections that goes to a governor appointed board that's supposed to then decide what they're going to do about it. And so let's make no mistake, the cost of fuel is going to go up. The governor's going to blame the market, or she's going to blame Putin. She's going to say you can't attribute it to this clean fuel, and she's going to try to get in this nebulous whole market issue, and then her EIB is not going to do anything. But I would like to point out the Environmental Improvement Board. If you look on their website, it's a 7-member board, and 4 of the members either have expired terms, their terms expired last year, or it's vacant. So, according to the governor, her own environmental improvement board doesn't have enough people to do anything right now. And I know you asked about Land Commissioner Garcia Richard. I think that is just two things. One, it's a petty getting back at the industry because her bill didn't pass in the legislative session. And two, she's looking for the next job. It's really that simple.
Yeah. Well, on the clean fuel standard, I definitely agree. It will raise prices. I also think that they were able to get it through in part simply because they did kind of obfuscate what was going to happen with the actual standard by shifting it to the Environmental Improvement Board, the same unelected body that approved our EV mandate here in the state of New Mexico.
It's a great
They,
point.
were able to kind of make it unclear in terms of what exactly that regulation was going to look like. It's always these people, they call themselves Democrats. They love nothing more than an unelected body to make all the tough decisions.
It really is true. And to tie it to COVID, I have never seen with what has happened with energy and inflation, both in New Mexico and across the nation over the last 3+ years. I've never seen such a disconnect for the party that claims they care about the poor, particularly in New Mexico. Disconnect for what they're paying at the gas pump and disconnect for what they're paying at the grocery store. It is mind-boggling to see.
Yeah, were there other issues? There was a lot going on with regard to the oil and gas industry in New Mexico. They came under more direct attack than I think we've seen here in recent years, but uh, there was a lot going on. Did you follow anything particularly closely when it came to New Mexico's legislative session, aside from those two issues?
Yeah, a couple things. I know you followed as well. I mean, post session, I saw that there were some exceptions for what are called stripper wells, wells that don't produce at nearly the rate. There were some exceptions from, increases, monetary increases on those wells, and the governor vetoed that. And so small businesses who have stripper wells in New Mexico are now going to have to pay more. And so that is something that's flown on the radar, but it's going to cost money. And again, that's all passed to consumers. But during the session itself, there was a larger effort that the governor was really behind and really tried to twist arms to get done was they're calling it modernize the Oil and Gas Act, which was really just raise taxes. And if I can, I'll just real quick, because I think it bears mentioning on the clean fuel standards, if you look at the literal title of the bill, it says assessing fees. So I don't know how you can say a bill that assesses fees will not raise any costs. But the larger question, and it's an important philosophical one, is how can leadership in Santa Fe, and I'm talking about the governor, her administration, and their choir in the legislature, continue to attack this industry before they realize that it is what is making all their liberal dreams come true? The governor cannot buy a new state plane without oil and natural gas. The governor can't cruise around the state and tell us about her moonshots for education without oil and natural gas. And everyone knows, we did a poll on it. Everyone knows that oil and natural gas is the most important industry in the state. And many New Mexicans also know and agree that the governor's policies have not been favorable for it. And so I guess where I come together on it is you'll see those on the left in the environmental community talk about diversification. We need to diversify our economy. And what they mean when they say that is we need to kill one industry and prop up the industry we like. And we see that because another bill that was really great, I think from Representative Block, called for fair taxes, talking about keeping things fair for renewable energy. And I say that loosely, but for wind and solar power, and that was voted down. So for every, here we have one industry that's paying nearly half of everything the state government does, and then another one who does nothing but take from the state government who decides that we can't survive if we have to pay our fair share. And so those are the things that are moving in Santa Fe that, show up in New Mexicans' pocketbooks and in the budget at a time when New Mexicans are already paying more for everything.
Yeah, the stripper well provision made its way into the tax bill, the tax omnibus bill, and uh, it's not a surprise at all that the governor vetoed it. But I was pretty shocked that it made its way in. Of course, you talk about economic diversification, and we had a $3.5 billion surplus yet again as we headed into the session. Of course, a vast majority of that from the oil and gas industry. And yet again, even their talks about diversification, while uh, you're correct, what tends to happen is that they want to kill oil and gas and then replace it with crickets. They
And unicorn dust, yes.
yeah, they don't have any plan, even uh, economically, with those $3.5 billion that are available. They mostly seem to be intent on shoveling that into various funds that simply prop government up for the future. So I had a piece in National Review last week. It was Rich State, Poor People, and really contrasted the difference between New Mexico, which is sitting on $43 billion in the permanent funds, again, oil and gas, and then all the money that they take in, $3.5 billion surplus, and they only spend or reduce taxes, a vast majority of it being spending, about $800 million in the last session. Well, where's that other, kind of 2.7 billion going? And that's not the first session we've seen that huge pile of money just kind of disappear into thin air. These are dollars that could be used to diversify our economy in a real sense of the word, but it seems to be just going into government coffers for future government spending.
Yeah, it's such a great point. I read that piece, and I think what spoke to me about it was it's just, I mean, it's nothing more but nothing bigger. It's huge, philosophical difference. The people in charge in Santa Fe right now believe that success is, couched in terms of how much money they spent on programs. And so they don't ever see this largesse of money that the state has as how can we get this back to the people? How can we make it so that it moves things for our people? And I'm talking about infrastructure. Or I've driven in on I-40 as you cross the Texas state line and come into New Mexico, and it's almost like taking your life in your hands with the condition of that road. And I understand that's a federal road and there's a whole lot going on, but for what we have in terms of our money, even after we've prudently put some aside, it is not reaching where it needs to reach to make a generational difference. And so I would, again, we had a governor, to your point, we had her come in and saying, wow, we've done our moonshot for education. She got the money, and has anyone held accountable? Like, what did we get for the last moonshot we funded? And so I can tell you, Governor Martinez had to be in during the Obama years where surpluses were very lean. In fact, we were happy to have a $250 million surplus. There has been no other governor in the history of the state probably that has more money to allocate and make changes with, and who has done less with it. And I think New Mexicans can look around and say, you know what, has the last 5 years, been indicative of the millions this industry is giving to the state? And I think most of them would say absolutely not. And but I guess we're just going to keep spending it to, I don't know, make a new department in Santa Fe, another government department. I mean, I'm sure Santa Fe is doing great, but there's more to New Mexico than Santa Fe.
Yeah. Well, um, we'll just see if we can keep fighting back against this governor because obviously she seems hell bent on not doing anything productive with any of the money. And of course, the legislature, while at times being willing to stand up to her and her worst impulses, uh, they clearly do not have a understanding of basic economics, or they do, and their intent is just to keep New Mexicans kind of poor and looking for their next government handout rather than kind of opening up our economy and making it a more successful state than it is and has been. So, oh,
Absolutely.
go ahead. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I mean, and I know you have been one of the best at pointing this out. I mean, all you have to do is just look at every state around New Mexico. Every single one has experienced growth and strength because they have embraced the free market. They've embraced the private sector to varying degrees. I'll be the first to say, but New Mexico just wants to continue to have a government-centric things, and I don't know. It's fascinating to me that when so many folks moved out of California, both during and after the pandemic, they seem to drive right over New Mexico and say, no, we'll go to Texas instead.
Yeah. John Trevor, the cartoonist for the Albuquerque Journal, a true treasure, has a cartoon from a few years ago that I pull out and use once in a while. It shows the state seal, which is crescit undo, which means it grows as it goes.
Mhm.
Instead, it's government of the government, by the government, and for the government, and that
Yeah.
seems to be the mentality of, unfortunately, certainly the Democrats in the legislature, some Republicans, and apparently a lot of voters. Although, with all 112 of them up this election, in addition to the presidency, we have yet another opportunity to move New Mexico in a more positive direction. But it doesn't happen by staying home. It doesn't happen by voting for the same old, same old. We've got to do something that changes the direction the state's been going in for the better part of a century. So, all right, well, let's move to the situation in Washington, D.C., but as kind of a bridge, if you will, a bridge to the 21st century. No, a bridge will use the gas prices. Gas prices have been rising. That is not atypical in the sense that we're heading into spring and there's changeovers in terms of fuel varietals, but it has been notable that gas prices are rising. And of course, uh, it depends on whether gas prices are up or down, whether Joe Biden takes credit for the gas prices or says that the president has nothing to do with gas prices going up. What's your take on what's going on just with gas prices? And you think we're looking at a expensive summer here if we're getting out on the roads?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it points to the lie that we're hearing out of Santa Fe that a clean fuels bill will not change the prices. Here we have, and you're right, it is seasonal because new summer fuel mixtures come into play and the price goes up. And so, if we're going to change the mixture every year and the price goes up, what happens when we change the mixture? Anyway, so yeah, the prices do go up with that, and I'm concerned that we're going to continue to see it. And production is doing okay. It could be doing a lot better. But something that gets ignored a whole lot, and New Mexico thankfully has opportunity in this, is we don't have great energy infrastructure. We have people like Deb Haaland that fight against any new pipeline that would help make delivery of energy more efficient. We have the Biden administration that would fight against any new refinery. I mean, we haven't had a major capacity refinery for fuel added in the United States since 1977. That's been how long it's been. And so when we talk about energy, it's not just about pulling the oil out of the ground, which is important and being able to do that. It's also about where does that oil go? Where does it get processed? How does it get back to the citizens? And when we don't have, additional pipeline or refining capacity to move this energy around, then we're going to continue to see these prices fluctuations. It's no different, for the roads that we're on. If you want people to come into your state, they have to be able to fly in, they have to be able to drive in and get into the state. It's the same for the energy that powers us. It needs to be able to move efficiently and quickly, and there's been no look at that type of infrastructure. And so that is something that, again, the Biden administration has failed on. But they understand it, because on the flip side, what Washington has done is thrown billions upon billions upon billions into what they call the green energy infrastructure. In fact, New Mexico is supposed to get some of these EV charging stations so that they can, I guess, take up more parking spots and sit empty along New Mexico's interstates. And so we are subsidizing, on one hand, very heavily, um, uh, the EV revolution that I think that bubble's already burst. But we're gonna, as government, we're going to continue to, I guess, subsidize it. While on the other hand, we are not letting private industry, who would on their own dime build out a whole lot of infrastructure if government would just get out of the way. And that's, to your point, part of the decision that people are going to have to make in November. Do we want to keep getting what we've been getting? Because what we've been getting is more expensive energy. Electricity's gone up nearly 30% under President Biden. And that's even before we talk about gasoline, more expensive food, more expensive everything. And if, people are happy with that free trial of the Green New Deal, then they're welcome to vote for it in November. But I have a feeling most Americans, most New Mexicans are not happy about it.
Now, you mentioned EVs, and those are obviously a major issue in the world of energy. Um, we've obviously, at the Rio Grande Foundation, most closely followed Governor Lujan Grisham's plans and mandates and whatnot. And I mean, just right here in New Mexico, if I can recite them all, I will. 43% in about 2 years is the requirement that we're going to have 43% of new vehicles sold being electric vehicles. She imposed regulations on the building codes for houses as well as for commercial developments, including apartments, to have EV charging stations. Uh, the, the federal government as well as the state combined are spending millions and millions of dollars on EV chargers. The utility P&M recently announced that they're spending $37 million to subsidize charging stations for EVs. Uh, I know that Washington is working on some of these issues, and the Biden administration is working to further impose EVs. What are you seeing in Washington, uh, which is obviously a lot of subsidies and mandates, but what's kind of going on up there?
Yeah, it's very similar. It's interesting. When I do interviews with national outlets, I often point to New Mexico because the actions are very similar. You have an executive, whether it's the president or the governor, bypassing their legislative body, Congress or the legislature, and forcing these mandates on it. Now, I don't know where the governor got 43% from. No media outlet has ever asked her where she came up with that arbitrary number, because I feel that's probably what it is. And then Joe Biden did the same thing through the Department of Energy and Department of Transportation, did a de facto rule saying, emissions have to be like this, which is an impossible standard to meet. And so it's supposed to force us all into EVs. And so at every turn, they're trying to undermine the free market. I mean, New Mexicans have spoken when it comes to EVs. If they don't like all the federal subsidy that goes behind it, all the state subsidy that goes behind it, and fawning coverage in the press, and that still only has brought less than 1% of the vehicles in New Mexico are EVs, then they're not going to choose them. And the position of Joe Biden and the governor is that, well, you haven't chosen what we want you to choose, so now we're going to force you to take what we want to take. And I should point out, at this point, the governor's car gets less than 13 miles to the gallon. But when we look at, this national philosophy, It is along those lines of we can't take it through Congress because nobody wants to be on the record voting for it, and we have to put it through a rulemaking process through the power of the executive that a lot of Americans, I'll just be frank, don't understand. They can kind of sneak in that we all don't look at the Federal Register every day, like the policy wonks do, to see what new rules are coming down until the next thing you know, there's a regulation and this product you used to buy in the store, or in this case on the car lot, isn't there anymore, all because not because of a bill Congress passed, but because of a regulation brought forth by an executive. And I'll just do one more thing that New Mexicans should be watching because it's happening in our state. Part of the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the largest green slush fund in history, calls for the creation of what are called green banks. And we uncovered the governor trying to do this without the legislature, without anybody knowing. And they are. They're creating a board that will call the Climate Investment Center. And it's their sole reason for doing it, Marty Chavez said, is because there's so much money coming from Washington. We have to have this set up. And so that's their mindset. They're going to put environmental radical activists on this board for a climate investment center to set up a green bank, a whole different funding structure for these quote unquote environmental projects because they can't get funded through commercial banks because they know they're a financial loser. But yet they're going to have this investment cooperative, apparently, that is not regulated by the legislature, but it's going to be in charge upon millions of dollars and of federal dollars, and they're just going to try to find a way to get the money out quick enough. And so, yeah, you're going to see that. They're all going to be at the ribbon cutting, but it's all going to be your tax dollars that are floating these projects that the commercial industry has decided are just not worth it.
Yeah, it definitely seems that New Mexico is transferring oil and gas wealth, that money, the $3.5 billion budget surplus, a lot of that is going by one way or the other to directly subsidize the governor's so-called green energy goals. And, the same is happening in Washington where uh, the money, we're largely going into debt and deficit in order to fund these so-called green energy goals. The state of New Mexico, for better or for worse, and I never thought I would say this, but for worse, they're less accountable because of that money flowing into the state. It really gives them a green light to go ahead and just keep wasting that money, and it seems like at least you have a little accountability when you have to go into debt in order to do it. But
Yeah,
it's a lot of other things going on with the regard to federal issues and Biden and the LNG. We've been talking about mostly oil, the oil side of things, but uh, New Mexico is a big natural gas producing state, and Biden recently put a halt to new permitting relating to LNG exports, and
mhm.
that just strikes me as the dumbest. There, at least a lot of policies you could argue one way or the other, but this is just dumb all around, and it
It
really
is.
highlights, I think, Biden's stupidity on public policy. So talk about that one.
Yeah, and you know what? And he's not stupid because it's a consolidation of power on him. But I'll get to that in a second. Let's just talk about because we need to acknowledge the goalposts that have moved, right? For years, the environmental community told us you have to get rid of coal and you have to get rid of oil because natural gas burns cleaner, and we're happy with natural gas. But as you've seen, and I know you know, that is no longer allowed, right? Because natural gas commits the sin of having to be extracted from the ground. So, crazy environmentalists who turn up their thermostat in the winter are more than happy to go after natural gas. And so let's just acknowledge how that goalpost has moved and how appeasement to the environmental community is really, it's just that appeasement. Once you meet their faulty goalposts, they're going to move the goalpost on you. But when you look at Joe Biden, if you look at it through the lens of what's best for America, what is best for our prosperity, what is best for our jobs, and what is best for our allies, you are absolutely right. It is the dumb of dumb decisions. If you look at it for what is good for Joe Biden's political friends, then it's a great decision because, as you know, I have to point out the Washington Free Beacon did a great story on this. John Podesta, a political operative who is now in charge of the Inflation Reduction Act money, pushed hard for this pause. And it turns out that his brother, lo and behold, is a registered lobbyist for foreign liquid natural gas producers. And so they will stand to profit from this move. But let's be clear. Joe Biden started out his State of the Union speech with a passionate cry to send more money to Ukraine. Joe Biden could send liquefied natural gas extracted in New Mexico to help Ukraine. And oh, by the way, create prosperity here at home. But he will never do that. He is happy with Putin supplying the natural gas and taking our natural gas out of the world market through this pause because it pleases his environmental constituency. It makes the people in the White House a little richer, and even it doesn't matter what it does to Americans. And that's when I look at what this environmental policy is. Joe Biden has no problem with fracking as long as it happens in Saudi Arabia. Joe Biden has no problem with more oil production as long as it happens with Venezuela. Joe Biden has no trouble with oil exports as long as it's Iran that is doing it. The only problem Joe Biden has is if a worker in Hobbs is getting that oil and making that benefit. That's where Joe Biden says we can't have it. It's not an environmental argument at all. It is an absolutely political power argument. And that's, the only lens you can look through where you start to see Joe Biden's actions. I won't say make sense, but they definitely become explainable.
Yeah, of course, U.S. producers are among the cleanest on the planet, whereas Venezuela, Iran, and pretty much every other country, Russia, not so clean. And, if you're going to solve a global problem like climate change, which is allegedly driving all this behavior, you want to produce the cleanest place imaginable. And of course, we also, by exporting LNG, are replacing in many places around the globe coal-fired power plants, which uh, seem to be the enemy, at least when they're located here in New Mexico. But if they're opening 2 a week in China, um, there's no you don't hear a peep from Martin Heinrich or from Joe Biden or anybody else.
I know, and don't start asking people where those EVs come from.
Yeah, well, Larry, we are going to have to leave it there. If people want to find out more about Power of the Future, your work, uh, where do they go?
Powerofthefuture.com, and they can send all their lovely email to Larry at powerofthefuture.com. If it's hate mail, I'll be glad to delete it.
Well, hopefully, listeners of this show will be fans and appreciate what you are doing. But maybe the governor's listening and just
She should.
twit, pressing her nails on the table and clicking them. But anyway, well, thank you again for all your work, Larry, and take care and hope to see you around soon. Thanks for
Thank,
listening to this week's podcast. Find all episodes at Tipping Points NM or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.